The Montana dawn in 2019 broke harsh and unforgiving over Jedediah Stone's Prairie Haven Ranch, illuminating the hulking yellow shapes of bulldozers squatting ominously at the property line like prehistoric predators ready to feast. This wasn't just land. It was 3 generations of Stone blood, sweat, and soul soaked into the very soil. Jedediah, known simply as Jed, felt the familiar ache in his hands calloused and shaped by 40 years of wrestling a living from the earth, just like his father and grandfather before him. But calluses were no match for the entity known as Omnicorp Development. They saw not a legacy, but a prime location for their soulless Big Sky Plaza, a sprawling monument to consumerism they planned to slap down right over his family's history. They had legions of smooth-talking lawyers in suits sharper than a serpent's tooth, pockets deeper than the Marianas Trench, and politicians bought and paid for like cheap trinkets. Jed had his heritage, his worn-out pickup truck, and a stubborn refusal to bend. The final notice had landed on his porch the day before, delivered by a man whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes. A man practically radiating expensive cologne and corporate indifference. 1 week, the papers declared, 7 short days to vacate the only home he'd ever known. That evening, the weight of it all pressed down on Jed like the vast Montana sky itself. He sat slumped on his porch steps, watching the sun bleed gold and crimson across his fields, perhaps for the last time. Defeat tasted like dust and despair in his mouth. Then headlights sliced through the twilight, bouncing up his long rutted driveway. Not the familiar rattle of his neighbor Tom's truck, nor the sleek menace of an Omnicorp vehicle. These were different. Military-grade SUVs, dark and imposing, rolled to a stop. 5 figures emerged, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light, faces obscured by shadow but carrying an undeniable air of purpose, of quiet, coiled strength. Jed's heart hammered against his ribs, a confusing mix of fear and something else, something unidentifiable. One figure stepped forward, his voice calm and even in the charged silence, addressing him not with threat, but with an unnerving directness. "Mr. Stone," the voice stated, "we heard you might be in need of some assistance." Jedediah Stone's farm was the bedrock of his existence, the anchor in his world. For 4 decades he'd walked its contours before the sun dared show its face. The cool morning air a familiar balm. The ancient cottonwood by Willow Creek wasn't just a tree. It was the sentinel guarding the spot where his father taught him the patient art of fishing, where laughter echoed across the years. The weathered barn, leaning slightly but standing proud, bore the faint pencil marks charting his daughter Clara's growth, a tangible timeline until college beckoned her away. This place held memories thicker than summer dust. It was more than just acres and yields. It was the house his grandfather, a man tougher than cured leather, had built board by painstaking board during the Great Depression. This land had weathered droughts that cracked the earth like old pottery, floods that turned fields into churning lakes, and market crashes that tested the resolve of the entire valley. Jed never chased riches. He'd turned down developers twice already, their offers feeling like insults to the legacy he guarded. His ambition was simpler: work the land, supply the local farmers' market with honest produce, and maybe, just maybe, see Clara walk these fields with her own children someday. Omnicorp, however, arrived like a plague. They didn't just covet his ranch. They envisioned the entire valley paved over, rebranded as their glittering Big Sky Plaza. The first inkling came at the town hall meeting, a spectacle of corporate maneuvering disguised as community engagement. A man named Reginald Sterling III, Omnicorp's regional director, stood at the podium, slick and polished as a newly minted coin. He presented dazzling, computer-generated renderings of the proposed monstrosity, his smile stretched unnaturally wide, promising jobs, tax revenue, and amenities nobody really asked for. When Jed, his voice rough with genuine concern, questioned the impact on local agriculture and water rights, Sterling waved him off with condescending amusement, uttering platitudes about the inevitable march of progress. Progress, Jed thought bitterly, looked a lot like annihilation. 2 days later, the invasion began subtly. Surveyors trespassing on his land, armed with permits he'd never seen, permits that seemed to have materialized out of thin air. A trip to the county office confirmed his fears. The clerk, averting her gaze, slid papers across the counter, revealing the rezoning had been approved weeks ago, during a closed session, mentioned only in a minuscule notice buried deep within the local paper. It was legal, technically. Jed scraped together funds he couldn't afford, hiring old Mr. Henderson, the town's semi-retired lawyer. Henderson reviewed the case, his face growing longer with each page, confirming the nauseating legality of Omnicorp's maneuvers while muttering about the suspicious speed of the approvals. The first official letter arrived soon after, outlining the eminent domain process with chilling formality and offering a sum for his land that was a cruel joke, barely half its true worth. This wasn't negotiation, it was legalized theft. His family's heritage traded for parking lots and chain restaurants. The pressure intensified like a tightening vice. Unmarked cars began cruising slowly past his house at odd hours, their occupants unseen behind tinted windows. His routine application for operating costs, usually a formality, was abruptly denied without explanation. Then came the final notice, the 7-day ultimatum delivered by Sterling's smug subordinate. That evening found Jed back on his porch, the sunset mocking him with its beauty, the silence amplifying his isolation. He had nowhere else to go, no plan B, just the crushing weight of impending loss. His fight felt futile, a single fist raised against an unstoppable tide. The following morning, Jed drove his aging pickup into town, the familiar route feeling alien, shadowed by impending doom. His mind churned with worry as he mechanically loaded sacks of feed, the everyday chore feeling heavy and pointless. It was then he saw him, an older gentleman wrestling with a stubbornly flat tire in the corner of the general store's parking lot. The man's face was a road map of wrinkles, his movements stiff, a faded Navy veteran cap perched on his head. Despite the storm raging inside him, Jed's ingrained neighborliness took over. He ambled over, offering a hand. The man's relief was palpable, his eyes, though weary, holding a spark of gratitude. "These old joints aren't what they used to be," the man admitted with a wry chuckle. Jed knelt, the familiar motions of changing a tire a small, welcome distraction. The man introduced himself simply as Silas Blackwood, mentioning he was just passing through visiting an old service buddy. Silas had a quiet intensity about him, a way of observing that made Jed feel strangely seen. Perhaps it was the shared burden of years etched on Silas's face, or maybe just the sheer desperation clawing at him, but Jed found himself unloading his troubles. He spoke of Omnicorp, the land grab disguised as progress, the seemingly airtight legal maneuvering that was stealing his birthright. Silas listened intently, his gaze steady, asking sharp, insightful questions that showed he understood more than just the surface details. When the spare was securely fastened, Silas insisted on buying Jed coffee at the dusty local diner. Sitting across from him in a worn vinyl booth, Silas shared a fragment of his own past, mentioning a son who faced a similar corporate Goliath years ago. "Sometimes the system is rigged," Silas stated plainly, his words resonating deep within Jed's weary soul. Jed confessed his timeline. 5 days left, Clara flying in tomorrow to help pack up a lifetime into boxes bound for nowhere. Silas scribbled something in a small, battered notebook, offering a cryptic remark about help sometimes arriving from the most unexpected quarters before they parted ways. Jed, preoccupied, gave the encounter little more thought as he drove back to the ranch, the brief respite evaporating like morning mist. That afternoon brought another blow. A courier delivered a crisp envelope from Omnicorp. Inside, a letter colder than a Montana winter declared a change of plans. They required vacant possession within 72 hours. 72 hours. The timeline had shrunk impossibly. A frantic call to Mr. Henderson yielded only more despair. The lawyer sounded defeated, confirming rumors that Omnicorp had the county board president, a man named Warren, securely in their pocket. There was nothing more he could do. That night was sleepless. Jed sat at his scarred kitchen table, surrounded by ghosts captured in faded photographs, his grandfather's stern gaze judging him from a silver frame, his own wedding picture a painful reminder of happier times. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he wrapped fragile family heirlooms in newspaper, each item a fresh stab of grief. His neighbor Tom stopped by with coffee at dawn, his face etched with concern, reporting the whole town was simmering with quiet outrage over Omnicorp's heavy-handed tactics, but acknowledging the grim reality. The law, however twisted, seemed to be on the corporation's side. As another sunset painted the sky in fiery hues, Jed wondered if this was truly it, the end of the line, the final hours in the only home he'd ever known. The silence of the house felt suffocating, pressing in on him. Clara arrived the next day, her eyes puffy and red from crying during the flight. The moment she saw her father standing small and weathered against the backdrop of their doomed home, she ran into his arms, clinging to him tightly. The injustice of it all felt raw and overwhelming as she looked at the familiar farmhouse, the swing set she'd played on, the fields that held countless childhood memories. Jed held her close, his own voice thick with emotion, acknowledging the harsh reality they now faced. Pragmatism warred with heartbreak as they began the gut-wrenching task of sorting through decades of accumulated life. In the dusty attic, Clara unearthed her old softball trophies, symbols of youthful triumphs that now seemed insignificant. Jed stumbled upon his father's farm journals, meticulous handwritten records from the 1950s, a poignant connection to the past he was about to lose. Each discovery was a bittersweet reminder of the roots Omnicorp was ripping out. As evening shadows lengthened, turning the fields to bruised purple, a sleek black SUV, ostentatiously expensive, crunched up the gravel driveway. Two men emerged, radiating an aura of smug entitlement. Jed instantly recognized one of them. Reginald Sterling III, Omnicorp's polished vulture accompanied by another suit who looked equally predatory. Sterling strode towards the porch, his voice dripping with false concern that failed to mask his impatience, inquiring about their packing progress. He then dropped the next bombshell with casual cruelty. The deadline was moved up again. They needed the property cleared by the following evening, tomorrow. Jed, standing rigidly on his porch, reminded Sterling of the 72-hour notice. Sterling offered a thin, reptilian smile, explaining that plans had changed. Their construction crews were ahead of schedule, and they needed to break ground Friday morning. No exceptions. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation, protesting the unfairness. Sterling merely shrugged, his eyes cold and dismissive, informing her that business wasn't about fairness, but efficiency, adding that their compensation offer was more than generous, a blatant lie that hung heavy in the air. After the vultures retreated in their luxury vehicle, Jed sank heavily into a kitchen chair, the fight draining out of him. They were offering barely half the land's value, a pittance for his soul, and they knew it. Dinner was a silent affair, the food tasteless, the future a terrifying blank. While washing dishes, the silence broken only by the clinking of plates. Jed's phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Hesitantly, he answered. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter with the State Tribune, explaining she'd been scrutinizing Omnicorp's projects statewide. She asked if she could visit the next morning. Jed agreed, though a lifetime of setbacks tempered any real hope. Clara, overhearing, shared his skepticism. Journalism, however well-intentioned, seemed unlikely to halt the inexorable advance of bulldozers and crooked deals. That night offered no sleep, only a gnawing anxiety. Jed walked his land under the cold moonlight. A final pilgrimage. He touched the rough bark of trees he'd planted as saplings, inhaled the scent of damp earth near the creek, finding the old fishing spot where 3 generations of stone men had cast their lines and shared their hopes. Sitting on the worn log bench, the stoic farmer finally let the tears come, silent tracks carving paths through the dust on his cheeks. Around midnight, headlights swept across the county road, moving slowly, deliberately. Another Omnicorp intimidation tactic, Jed assumed bitterly. The vehicle paused at his gate, then, inexplicably, turned and drove away. As dawn painted the eastern sky, a fragile kind of peace settled over Jed. He would lose the farm, yes, but Omnicorp wouldn't take his dignity. He would walk away with his head held high. Clara found him on the porch, watching the sunrise ignite the peaks of the distant Rockies. She put her hand on his arm, her voice quiet but firm, telling him how proud she was of his fight, win or lose. Some battles you just can't win, Jed murmured, squeezing her hand. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't fight them. Sarah Chen arrived precisely at 9 o'clock the next morning. Younger than Jed had pictured, she possessed an intensity that belied her years, her eyes sharp and intelligent, her notebook already filled with meticulous notes. Settling at the familiar kitchen table, she laid out her findings. She had been tracking Omnicorp's acquisitions across Montana for months, uncovering a disturbing pattern of rushed approvals, conveniently overlooked environmental regulations, and highly questionable zoning changes benefiting the corporation. Jed provided copies of all his documents, the letters, the notices, Mr. Henderson's pessimistic assessments, feeling a pang of hopelessness as he handed them over, evidence that felt tragically irrelevant with the bulldozers poised to roll tomorrow. Sarah studied the papers with fierce concentration, her brow furrowing. She pointed specifically to the county board meeting minutes Jed had obtained. His property discussion, the crucial rezoning vote, had occurred during a closed executive session, a clear violation of Montana's open meeting laws. Clara leaned forward, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes, asking if this could help. Sarah nodded cautiously, confirming it was a strong legal point, but tempering their expectations by reminding them that legal challenges were notoriously slow, a luxury they simply didn't possess. After the reporter departed, promising to dig deeper but offering no immediate solutions, Jed and Clara resumed the somber task of packing. The house felt emptier with each box filled. Around noon, the routine was shattered by the arrival of an unexpected delivery truck. The driver, looking vaguely official, carried a thick, plain manila envelope, asking for Jedediah Stone and requiring a signature. Puzzled, Jed signed. Inside the envelope was a standard file folder, unmarked except for the word "Confidential" stamped across it in bold red letters. Tucked inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed note. "Evidence you might find useful. A concerned citizen." The folder itself contained a sheaf of documents that made Jed's blood run cold. Internal Omnicorp emails discussing payoffs, coded financial records detailing wire transfers, and most damningly, copies of bank statements showing substantial deposits into accounts belonging to County Board President Warren and two other key officials, coinciding exactly with the dates of crucial zoning votes. This wasn't just shady dealing, this was blatant bribery. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she scanned the incriminating papers alongside her father. "Dad, this is illegal," she whispered, the full implication hitting them like a physical blow. This was the smoking gun. Jed immediately called Sarah Chen. The reporter, sensing the urgency in his voice, was back at the ranch within the hour. Her eyes widened as she examined the documents, her journalistic instincts kicking into high gear. She meticulously photographed every single page, her expression a mixture of excitement and grim determination. This, she declared, was exactly the kind of concrete proof she'd been searching for, the missing link in her investigation. When she asked how he obtained such sensitive information, Jed could only shrug truthfully, explaining the anonymous delivery. As evening began to cast long shadows across the ranch, the quiet was broken by the arrival of more vehicles. First, a local TV news van alerted by Sarah. Then Sarah's editor arrived, sensing a major story. And most surprisingly, Sheriff Brody pulled up in his patrol car, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by a stern professionalism. Sarah quickly briefed the sheriff, handing him copies of the photographed documents. Brody, a man known for his fairness despite the pressures of small-town politics, reviewed the evidence, his expression hardening into granite resolve. "This is enough," he stated grimly, confirming he was opening an official investigation immediately and would need to take the documents as evidence. Jed voiced the question weighing heavily on his mind. What about tomorrow? Omnicorp was still coming. The sheriff made a call, his conversation tense and clipped. After hanging up, he turned to Jed, a measure of relief smoothing his features. "Judge Harmon is issuing an emergency stay, effective immediately. Nobody sets foot on this property to force you off while these allegations are under investigation." For the first time in weeks, genuine hope surged through Jed, a fragile but potent force against the tide of despair. The news crew clamored for an interview, but Jed politely declined, stating simply that he was just a farmer trying to protect his land and had nothing more to say until the investigation unfolded. After the flurry of activity subsided and everyone departed, leaving an almost surreal calm, Jed and Clara sat together on the old porch swing. The familiar creak, a comforting sound. Clara voiced the question lingering in both their minds. Who could have possibly sent those documents? Jed shook his head, utterly baffled, acknowledging that whoever it was possessed intimate knowledge of Omnicorp's criminal activities and had chosen this exact moment to intervene. As true darkness enveloped Prairie Haven Ranch, broken only by the pinpricks of distant stars in the vast Montana sky, Jedediah Stone noticed more headlights approaching, not the slow crawl of intimidation this time, but a purposeful advance. His stomach clenched instinctively. It wasn't one vehicle, but a convoy. 5 large, dark SUVs, the kind favored by government agencies or private security forces, rolling silently up his driveway and parking in a precise formation near the farmhouse. Jed instinctively moved in front of Clara, shielding her, his mind racing through possibilities. None of them good. Men began to emerge, moving with an efficiency and discipline that spoke of training far beyond corporate security. Then a familiar voice cut through the tense night air. "Mr. Stone?" It was Silas Blackwood, the man with the flat tire, the quiet veteran. But the man standing before him now was transformed. Gone were the faded jeans and casual cap. He stood tall and straight in a crisp U.S. Navy uniform adorned with the insignia of a commander. "Commander Silas Blackwood, United States Navy, retired," he announced, extending a firm hand towards Jed. Behind him stood the other 4 men, not in uniform, but radiating the same controlled energy, their eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance. "These are some of my former team members," Silas explained, indicating the silent figures behind him, Navy SEALs. Jed, utterly bewildered, shook the offered hand, the pieces clicking into place with dizzying speed. Silas elaborated, his voice calm and measured. After their chance encounter at the general store, disturbed by Jed's story and recognizing the hallmarks of corporate overreach he'd seen before, Silas had made some calls. His own son, it turned out, was a lawyer specializing in eminent domain abuse cases. Furthermore, Silas revealed, these men weren't just former teammates. They represented different facets of a force now aligned in Jed's corner. One stepped forward, introducing himself as Mike Johnson, currently attached to the state attorney general's office. He confirmed that the anonymous documents Jed received were indeed leaked from their ongoing covert investigation into Omnicorp's statewide operations. They had been building a case for months, Mike explained, but Omnicorp, likely tipped off by their moles within the county, kept covering their tracks. They needed a way to get the evidence into the right hands, into the public sphere, without compromising the larger investigation or revealing their sources. Silas's encounter with Jed provided the perfect unforeseen opportunity. Another man, identifying himself as a digital forensics expert, added that they had already secured the electronic trails of the illegal payments. The corrupt county officials wouldn't be able to delete the evidence now. Silas placed a reassuring hand on Jed's shoulder, his gaze meeting Jed's with unwavering conviction. They were here, he said, because what Omnicorp was doing was fundamentally wrong, an abuse of power that corroded the very fabric of community. And, he added with a slight smile, because witnessing Jed help a stranger change a tire, even while facing his own devastating crisis, told Silas everything he needed to know about Jed's character. He was someone worth fighting for. Clara, still processing the incredible turn of events, asked about the formidable military-style vehicles. One of the SEALs grinned. Intimidation, he remarked dryly, is a two-way street. Reginald Sterling and his private security detail, he informed them, were currently parked down the county road, likely preparing for a planned midnight visit intended to apply final, forceful pressure on Jed. As if on cue, the flashing lights of Sheriff Brody's patrol car appeared again. The sheriff stepped out, taking in the unexpected gathering with a raised eyebrow. He acknowledged Silas, recognizing him now. "Didn't realize you were involved in this, Commander," Brody commented. "Just offering support to a fellow American facing long odds," Silas replied evenly. The sheriff nodded, then delivered the final piece of satisfying news. Reginald Sterling III had just been taken into custody for questioning. Based on the evidence Jed provided, Judge Harmon had issued warrants not only for Sterling, but also for County Board President Warren and the other officials implicated in the bribery scheme. The next morning, the dawn Jed had feared would be his last on the ranch broke clear and bright. Instead of bulldozers, he saw unmarked federal vehicles escorting a handcuffed, incredulous-looking Reginald Sterling III away. News crews captured the entire scene, broadcasting the downfall of the arrogant executive and the unraveling of Omnicorp's corrupt enterprise across the state. 3 months later, Jed sat on his porch swing, the familiar creak now a sound of peace, not impending doom. Silas Blackwood sat beside him, Clara perched on the railing, pouring coffee. Prairie Haven Ranch was safe, the fields stretching out green and promising under the afternoon sun. The Omnicorp investigation had blown wide open, exposing corruption that reached high into the state government, leading to multiple arrests and indictments. The Big Sky Plaza project was dead, buried under the weight of its own illegality. Jed shook his head, still finding it hard to believe that fixing a flat tire had triggered such a cascade of events, saving his home and exposing so much darkness. Silas smiled, the weathered lines around his eyes crinkling. "In the SEALs," he explained, "you learn to recognize good people, people of integrity worth defending. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but right here protecting the heartland from different kinds of enemies." Clara mentioned Jed was already talking about establishing a legal defense fund to help other farmers facing similar predatory land grabs. Silas nodded approvingly, confirming his team, including his lawyer son, was already on board to offer pro bono assistance. "Some fights," he reiterated. "You can't win alone." As the setting sun painted the Montana sky in brilliant shades of gold and rose, bathing the saved fields in warm light, Jed felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for his farm, but for the unexpected allies, the hidden currents of justice, and the undeniable truth that sometimes karma delivers its verdict with the quiet precision of retired Navy SEALs. He raised his mug, echoing Silas's earlier sentiment, to the battles worth fighting, and the people worth fighting alongside.